The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. All eyes were on the man standing tall in his Navy uniform, his dark skin glowing under the sharp white lights. He was calm, proud, and steady, even as whispers filled the room. Some whispered in respect, others with prejudice. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. A police officer, red in the face with rage, stepped forward. He looked at the Navy SEAL like he wasn't human, like he didn't belong there at all. The officer's hand twitched with anger before he suddenly raised it high and struck the Navy SEAL across the face. The sound of the slap echoed so loudly in the courtroom that even the judge gasped. The audience froze in shock. Time seemed to stop. A Navy SEAL, a hero who had risked his life for his country, was just hit, inside a courtroom of all places. For a second, no one moved. The Navy SEAL's head tilted slightly from the blow, but he didn't stumble. He didn't shout. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and his silence screamed louder than any words. And then something happened that no one in that room would ever forget. The officer who had struck him began to tremble. His smug grin disappeared, his skin paled, and his hand started to shake. Because in the next moment, justice stepped into that courtroom in a way nobody saw coming. But before we get to what happened next, let me take you back to how it all began. The Navy SEAL's name was Marcus Steele. A tall, strong man with broad shoulders and steady eyes. Marcus had faced war zones, sniper fire, and nights colder than ice. Yet none of those things cut him as deep as what he had been facing back home, racism. Marcus had served overseas for years, protecting people he had never met. He carried medals on his chest, proof of courage and sacrifice. But when he came back to his own country, some people didn't see the hero in him. They didn't see the Navy SEAL, the protector, the man who had sworn an oath. They only saw his skin. One morning, while Marcus was driving through his hometown after visiting his mother, flashing lights appeared behind him. Police. He pulled over calmly, rolling down his window. He expected the normal routine. Instead, 2 officers stormed toward him with guns drawn. Out of the car, one of them barked. Marcus froze. His hand stayed on the steering wheel. He had seen this before. He knew what could happen if he moved too fast. "I'm a Navy SEAL," Marcus said slowly, his voice calm. "Here's my military ID." But they didn't care. To them, he wasn't a Navy SEAL. He wasn't a veteran. He wasn't a man. He was just a black driver in the wrong place at the wrong time. They pulled him out, shoved him onto the ground, and cuffed him roughly as if he were a criminal. Crowds had gathered, people holding up phones and recording. Some shouted for the cops to stop. Others stood frozen. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He knew the truth would come out in court. And so, days later, here he was, standing tall in front of a judge, wearing his Navy uniform to prove exactly who he was, to prove his innocence. The courtroom was divided. Some people stared at him with pride, while others muttered ugly words under their breath. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had faced far worse. He believed in justice. He believed the truth would win. And that's when it happened. The officer who had arrested him, filled with hate, lost control. His anger boiled over. He wanted to show Marcus that he had power over him, even in a courtroom. And so, in front of the judge, in front of the jury, in front of everyone, he raised his hand and struck him across the face. The courtroom erupted in gasps and shouts. The judge slammed her gavel, yelling for order. Marcus stood still, refusing to break. The sting on his cheek was nothing compared to the sting of humiliation. But what nobody knew, not the officer, not the judge, not even Marcus himself, was that someone in that room had already picked up their phone. Someone had dialed a number that would change everything. A number that would bring power into the room. Power greater than the badge, greater than the gavel, greater than hate itself. The phone rang once, twice, and then someone answered. The officer who had struck Marcus was about to pay the price. And that was when the doors of the courtroom burst open. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom slammed open so hard that the sound rattled the walls. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. The officer who had struck Marcus froze in place, his hand still trembling from what he had done. In the doorway stood a tall figure in full military uniform, decorated with ribbons, medals, and a presence so commanding it seemed to pull the air out of the room. It was Admiral Jonathan Reeves, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. His eyes locked on Marcus first, then swept across the courtroom like a storm. The silence was unbearable. Nobody dared to breathe. Even the judge's gavel slipped slightly in her hand. "Who struck this man?" The Admiral's voice boomed, sharp and cold. The racist officer's face turned pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. He tried to hide his hand behind his back, as if that would erase what he had done. The Admiral stepped forward, his boots echoing loudly on the polished floor. "Did I not ask a question?" The Admiral thundered again, his voice carrying the weight of command that had once sent sailors into battle. The officer stumbled back, his confidence gone. He looked like a child caught stealing. The courtroom audience whispered fiercely, phones lifted, recording every second. And then, something shocking happened. The Admiral walked straight past the officer and stood directly in front of Marcus. His voice softened, but only slightly. "Lieutenant Steele," he said, using Marcus's full rank, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "On behalf of the United States Navy, I apologize for the disrespect you have suffered today." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus held his head high, but his eyes burned with emotion. An admiral had just acknowledged him publicly, honoring his rank when the police and others had tried to strip him of his dignity. But the admiral wasn't finished. He slowly turned toward the racist officer, his sharp eyes narrowing. "As for you," he began, his voice chilling, "your actions will not go unpunished." The officer's knees wobbled. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked at the judge as if begging for help, but the judge only stared at him with thin, tight lips. The admiral's words weren't empty. He had the power to make phone calls, the kind of calls that ended careers in seconds. The officer's fate was about to change forever. But let's pause here, because before this moment, before the admiral walked in like a storm, there was another storm brewing in Marcus's life. One that led him here. One that made this courtroom scene so much bigger than it seemed. 2 nights before the trial, Marcus sat in his mother's small living room, the smell of her homemade stew filling the air. She had always been his anchor, the one who reminded him who he was even when the world tried to erase it. "Baby," she said softly, placing her wrinkled hand over his. "Don't let them break you tomorrow. They will try. They'll look at your skin before they look at your medals. But you're stronger than that." Marcus nodded quietly, though his jaw was tight. He hated how right she was. He had fought for his country, but now he had to fight inside it. His younger sister, Alicia, had been pacing by the window. "You should call someone higher up," she had insisted. "You don't have to go through this alone. You've served under admirals, commanders, people who know you, respect you." But Marcus had shaken his head. "No, I can't ask for favors. This fight, it has to be mine." And yet, Alicia had not been satisfied. She knew her brother. She knew his pride. And in her gut, she knew he might not make it out of this trial unharmed, not without someone powerful standing behind him. So when Marcus was slapped in the courtroom, when the crowd gasped in horror, it wasn't Marcus who had called anyone. It was Alicia, sitting in the back row of the courtroom. She had already dialed the number of the one person she knew would come, Admiral Jonathan Reeves. Back in the present, the admiral's eyes bore into the officer, who was now sweating so heavily it dripped down his temple. "You struck a decorated Navy SEAL," the admiral said slowly, each word cutting like a blade. "In uniform, in court, in front of witnesses." The officer's lips quivered. He was resisting arrest. "Enough," the admiral barked, his voice thunderous. The officer flinched, nearly falling over. "The cameras don't lie. The witnesses don't lie. You disgraced not only this man, but the very justice system you swore to serve." The tension was suffocating. Every single person in that room could feel that the officer's career, his freedom, maybe even his entire life, was about to collapse before their eyes. But just when everyone thought the admiral was about to deliver the final blow, something happened. A voice spoke up. "Objection." It was the officer's lawyer, a slick man in a sharp suit, jumping to his feet with a smirk. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the admiral has no authority in this courtroom. He is trying to intimidate an officer of the law, and I demand that he be removed." The courtroom erupted into chaos. People shouted. The judge banged her gavel, and the racist officer's smirk returned, as if he had just found a lifeline. Marcus clenched his fists, his heart racing. The admiral stood firm, unshaken. But everyone knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because the admiral was not about to back down. And when he finally spoke again, his next move would shake the entire courtroom to its core. The courtroom was in chaos. The officer's lawyer stood tall, pointing his finger toward Admiral Reeves like he was just another man. "Your Honor," the lawyer said again, his voice dripping with arrogance, "this is a civilian court, not a Navy base. This admiral has no standing here. He's trying to bully my client, and I demand he be silenced." The racist officer smirked, almost proud again, as though the lawyer's words had given him back his power. The air inside the courtroom grew heavier by the second. Everyone seemed frozen between disbelief and fear. The racist officer leaned back in his chair, a sly grin stretching across his face as if he thought the tables had turned. But Admiral Reeves didn't flinch. His uniform, with its rows of medals that told the story of decades of service, seemed to shine brighter under the courtroom lights. His voice came out steady, calm, yet with a weight that shook the silence. "You're right," he said, his eyes locked on the lawyer. "This is a civilian court, but don't mistake that for weakness. I am not here to play politics or to bully. I am here because this Navy SEAL," he turned to point at the black man sitting handcuffed in shame, "has spilled blood for this country. He has earned every ounce of respect this courtroom can give. And you," his voice dropped, sharper now, "you allowed your client to strike him like he was nothing." The judge shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. The jury leaned forward, whispering among themselves. The spectators in the back, some gasping, some covering their mouths, knew something far bigger than a trial was unfolding before their eyes. The lawyer tried to recover, puffing out his chest. "Objection. None of this is relevant. My client has the right." But Reeves cut him off with a cold stare. "Your client has the right to defend himself, yes. But what he did was not defense. It was hate." His words struck like thunder, and I have the recordings to prove it. The room erupted into gasps. The officer's smile faltered. "Recordings?" the judge asked quickly, leaning forward. "What recordings?" Reeves turned slightly, signaling toward the back doors. Two sailors in Navy uniforms stepped inside, carrying a secure case. They walked with precision, placing it on the table in front of the admiral. Reeves tapped it lightly, his eyes never leaving the officer. Every word he spoke, every slur, every threat, captured on camera. The officer's face went pale. He started to shake his head. No, that's not possible. Aye. But Reeves didn't let him finish. He looked toward the judge and said firmly, "With your permission, Your Honor, we'll play it right now." The judge hesitated. Her gavel tapped once against the wood. The courtroom was at the edge of bursting apart with anticipation. And then she nodded. Permission granted. The sailors pressed a button, and a small speaker came to life. Static filled the air for a moment before a harsh, ugly voice cut through it. It was the racist officer, clear as day. "Look at you," the recording played. "Think that uniform makes you equal to me? You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." The courtroom went completely silent. Not even a breath could be heard. The officer's words, his hatred, echoed through every corner. The recording went on. Threats, slurs, promises of violence, each one uglier than the last. The Black SEAL sat still, his eyes locked on the table, the weight of years of silence suddenly being laid bare before the world. The people in the courtroom weren't just hearing insults. They were hearing proof. By the time the recording ended, the officer looked like a ghost. His lawyer fumbled with his papers, searching desperately for something to say. But there was nothing. No excuse. No cover. Then Reeves leaned forward, his voice low, filled with fury. "This is the man you want to defend? This is the man you think deserves protection from justice?" No one spoke. The silence itself felt like judgment. The judge finally raised her gavel again, her voice stern. Order! Order in this courtroom! But just as she was about to speak further, the officer suddenly stood up, his face twisted in panic. He slammed his hands on the table and shouted, "That's a lie! This is all a setup!" The jury flinched. The spectators gasped. The officer's rage spilled over, raw and desperate, shaking the entire courtroom. And in that exact moment, 2 U.S. Marshals rushed forward to restrain him. The officer struggled violently, his voice cracking as he shouted, "You can't do this to me. I'm a cop. I'll ruin all of you." The Marshals forced him down, pinning him against the table, while the judge pounded her gavel harder and harder. And just as the chaos reached its peak, Reeves stepped forward again, his voice like steel. "No," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've already ruined yourself." The officer froze, his struggle slowing, his eyes darting back and forth between the Admiral and the SEAL he had tried to humiliate. His mouth opened to speak, but before he could say a word, the courtroom doors slammed open again. Everyone turned. A tall man in a dark suit entered, carrying a sealed folder. He whispered something to the judge, who instantly went pale. The judge looked down at the papers, her lips trembling. Then, with a deep breath, she raised her eyes and said the words that made the entire courtroom gasp again. "This changes everything." And just like that, the room exploded into whispers, questions, and fear. What was in the folder? Who said it? And what did it mean for the officer, the SEAL, and everyone else in that room? The judge's hands trembled slightly as she held the sealed folder, her eyes scanning the first page inside. The color drained from her face. She quickly snapped the folder shut, as though what she had just seen was too heavy to reveal at once. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled frantically, their pens scratching against notepads. Jurors leaned toward one another, whispering nervously. The racist officer, still pinned down by the Marshals, stopped struggling for the first time. His eyes flicked from the judge to the Admiral, then to the folder. A drop of sweat slid down his forehead. The judge cleared her throat, but her voice cracked under the pressure. This court is now in recess. Everyone clear the room." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Recess. Now, just when things were reaching their peak. "No!" the officer shouted, his face red and wild. "You can't do this. I demand to know what's in there. That's about me, isn't it? You have no right." "Silence!" the judge snapped, slamming her gavel with a force that echoed like a gunshot. But the officer wouldn't stop. His words spilled out like poison. "This is a setup. You're all against me. I've served longer than that." He jerked his head toward the Black SEAL, sneering. "That nobody ever did. He doesn't deserve the respect you're giving him." The words hung heavy in the air. Even the Marshals holding him down looked disgusted. Admiral Reeves finally stepped forward, his face calm, but his eyes sharp. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "the truth has already spoken louder than his excuses, but I believe what's in that folder will finish what we started." The judge hesitated, gripping the folder tighter, her knuckles white. Then she turned to Reeves. "Admiral, this information is classified. It was just delivered from the Department of Justice." The room gasped again. "Classified? DOJ. What does it say?" Reeves asked, his voice low but commanding. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at the officer, who was now breathing hard like a cornered animal. Then she looked at the SEAL, who sat quietly, his dignity unshaken despite the humiliation he'd endured. Finally she spoke. "It says that Officer Randall," she paused, the officer flinching at the sound of his name, "is under federal investigation for corruption, for evidence tampering, and for racially motivated abuse of power." The entire courtroom erupted in shock. People shouted. Jurors covered their mouths. Reporters nearly leapt out of their chairs. The Marshals tightened their grip on the officer as he screamed. "Lies! All lies! You planted that. You're trying to destroy me." His face turned crimson, veins bulging from his neck. But the judge wasn't finished. She raised the folder higher. "And according to these documents, there's video evidence of Officer Randall planting drugs on innocent black men during his so-called arrests." The courtroom exploded. Gasps. Cries. Even the jury stood to their feet in disbelief. The SEAL looked up slowly, his jaw tightening. For years, he had carried the weight of being disrespected because of his skin. And now, the truth was unraveling right before him. Reeves turned toward Randall, his voice like a knife. You thought you were untouchable, but the very system you twisted is the one that will bring you down. Randall's eyes darted around the room, wild and panicked. He suddenly shoved against the marshals, screaming, "No! No! I won't let you do this to me." The marshals tried to restrain him, but Randall thrashed violently, knocking over a chair. The crowd screamed as chaos erupted, and then he broke free. For a brief, terrifying moment, the racist officer stood in the middle of the courtroom, unshackled, eyes blazing with desperation. His hand darted toward the holster of one of the marshals. People screamed louder. Jurors ducked. Reporters dropped their pens. And the Black Navy SEAL, the man Randall had tried to humiliate, stood up, his eyes locked on the danger unfolding. The room froze. Time seemed to stop. Would Randall get hold of the weapon? Would blood be spilled in that very courtroom? The SEAL took a single step forward, ready to act. And then, picking up from the heart-pounding moment where Randall, the racist officer, lunged for the marshal's gun in the middle of the courtroom. The crowd screamed as Randall's fingers brushed the marshal's holster. "No!" the judge yelled, banging her gavel helplessly, her voice drowned by the chaos. Jurors ducked behind a railing, terrified. Reporters dropped their cameras, scrambling for cover. But one person didn't flinch. The Black Navy SEAL. He moved like lightning, instincts sharpened from years of training in combat zones across the world. While everyone else panicked, he stayed calm, focused. His eyes locked onto Randall's desperate hand clawing for the gun. In a single, fluid motion, the SEAL stepped forward, twisted Randall's wrist, and slammed him against the courtroom wall with such precision that the entire room gasped. Randall howled in pain, his fingers snapping away from the weapon. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, spittle flying from his mouth. "I'm the law here. I'm the one who—" The SEAL cut him off, his voice low but firm. "Not anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the marshals paused, momentarily stunned by the sheer skill of what they had just witnessed. The SEAL didn't break a sweat. He had disarmed enemies in foreign lands, rescued hostages from terrorists, and faced death more times than most people could imagine. Compared to those battles, Randall's flailing was nothing. But this wasn't about skill. It wasn't even about stopping a violent man. It was about justice. Randall struggled under the SEAL's grip, but it was useless. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The man who had once mocked, belittled, and struck him in front of the entire courtroom now trembled like a child, pinned effortlessly by the very person he thought he could break. The Admiral stepped forward, his face grave. "Stand down, sailor," he said to the SEAL, though his voice carried respect, not command. The SEAL hesitated. His grip tightened for a second, his jaw hard. Years of pain, anger, and humiliation surged through him. He could end this man right now, and part of him wanted to. But then he looked around, at the terrified jurors, at the horrified judge, at the young black boy in the gallery who stared at him with wide, hopeful eyes, as if silently begging, "Show them who we are." The SEAL exhaled slowly. His hand loosened. He shoved Randall back into the marshal's arms. The courtroom erupted into relieved applause. Randall, however, wasn't done. His voice cracked, desperate. "You think this is over? You think they'll believe a thug in uniform over me? I've built this city. I've kept it safe. They'll never side with you." But for the first time, no one listened. The judge straightened, her voice calm but sharp. "Officer Randall, you have disgraced this courtroom. You have disgraced your badge. And now," she slammed her gavel down, "you will face justice for everything you've done." Randall froze, his face twisted in disbelief. The Admiral glanced at the SEAL, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge nodded. The Admiral stepped into the center of the courtroom, his presence commanding silence. This sailor is not just any man. He is a Navy SEAL. He has risked his life for this country more times than Randall has ever risked his reputation. And while Randall used his power to oppress, this man used his strength to protect. Today, Everyone in this room saw the difference between cowardice and courage. Applause broke out again, louder this time. Even the jurors clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Randall's face turned pale. For the first time, he realized he had lost. But the SEAL knew better. This wasn't the end. Corruption ran deeper than just one officer. Randall was only a symptom of a disease that had infected the system for far too long. And as the SEAL sat back down, his eyes narrowed. Something told him this battle was only the beginning. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Everyone turned. 2 FBI agents in dark suits walked in, flashing their badges. The room fell into stunned silence. The lead agent spoke clearly, his voice booming. By order of the Department of Justice, Officer Randall is hereby taken into federal custody. Gasps filled the air. The marshals tightened their hold on Randall, but the officer thrashed violently again, screaming at the top of his lungs. "No, you can't do this. This is my city. I'll destroy all of you. You'll regret this." The agent stepped closer, cutting him off. And then, Randall suddenly went silent. Not because he chose to, but because one of the FBI agents dropped a single file onto the judge's bench. A file thicker than the one she had just read. The judge's hand hovered over it, her eyes widening. Everyone leaned in. What could possibly be inside? The truth was about to come out, and it would shake the entire courtroom to its core. The sound of the heavy file hitting the wooden bench echoed through the courtroom, like a thunderclap. Everyone's eyes were fixed on it. The judge hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as it hovered above the folder. Randall's face twisted with panic. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who suddenly realized the floor beneath him was about to collapse. The lead FBI agent broke the silence. His voice was steady, calm, and commanding. "Your Honor, inside this file are documents, recordings, and testimonies exposing years of corruption, abuse, and illegal activities connected to Officer Randall and others like him. This goes beyond a single courtroom fight. This is a network." The room erupted in gasps. The reporters scrambled, fumbling for their cameras again. Jurors exchanged fearful looks. The SEAL leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He had suspected this wasn't just about one racist cop, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach tighten. The judge opened the file slowly. Inside were stacks of papers, photographs, transcripts of phone calls, even secret recordings. She scanned the first few pages, and her face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath. Randall snapped, thrashing against the marshal's grip. "Lies. It's all lies. You don't have anything on me." The agent raised a hand, silencing him with a look colder than steel. "We have everything." The second agent stepped forward, holding up a small black device. "We also have audio recordings of Officer Randall conspiring with local officials to falsify charges against innocent people, many of whom just happened to be black or brown. These were not accidents. These were targeted attacks." The courtroom gasped again, louder this time. One of the jurors broke down, covering her face with her hands as tears spilled. The young black boy in the gallery clutched his mother's arm tightly, his small voice whispering, "They finally caught him." Randall's body shook with fury. "You can't do this to me. I am the law here." The Admiral stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "No, Randall. The law is bigger than you, bigger than your hate, and today it caught up with you." For the first time, Randall had no comeback. His lips quivered, but no words came out. The SEAL sat silently, his chest rising and falling slowly, his fists clenched under the table. He thought back to every insult, every threat, every slap of disrespect this man had thrown his way. He thought of the pain in his mother's voice the night she begged him not to get pulled into trouble with cops like Randall. He thought of the countless faces, men, women, and children, who had suffered because this man believed his badge made him untouchable. And now, justice was standing right in front of them, in the form of 2 FBI agents and a thick file of evidence. The judge took a deep breath, steadying herself. She looked at Randall. "Officer Randall, in light of this overwhelming evidence, I have no choice but to remand you into federal custody immediately. Your badge is stripped, your authority revoked. From this moment forward, you are no longer an officer of the law. You are a criminal defendant." The entire courtroom erupted into cheers and claps. Some people stood on their feet, their joy uncontainable. But the SEAL didn't celebrate. His instincts told him something was off. He looked closely at Randall and saw it. The man wasn't just angry. He was smiling. Not a wide grin. Not a laugh. Just a small, crooked smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The SEAL's stomach dropped. That wasn't the look of a man who had lost. It was the look of a man who still had something up his sleeve. The FBI agent must have noticed it too. He turned, barking orders to the marshals. "Get him out of here now. Maximum restraints. Double lock everything." But before the marshals could move, Randall tilted his head back and shouted at the top of his lungs. "You think you've won? You think you've beaten me? You don't even know the half of it." The lights in the courtroom flickered, and then every single bulb went out. The room plunged into complete darkness. Screams filled the air. Chairs toppled. Reporters cried out. The sound of heavy boots thudded across the floor. The SEAL's training kicked in instantly. He crouched low, his ears tuning to every sound, his muscles ready. Then, through the chaos, he heard it. A voice. Low, threatening, coming from somewhere in the darkness. "You'll never stop us." And then, a deafening gunshot. The courtroom exploded into panic. The crack of the gunshot tore through the pitch-black courtroom, making everyone duck for cover. Screams echoed, metal chairs scraped, and the sound of people crashing into one another filled the air. The SEAL's instinct sharpened. His pulse raced, but his mind was clear. He hit the ground, rolling toward the nearest cover, his ears straining to catch the tiniest sound. "Stay down. Everyone stay down," shouted the FBI agent, his voice cutting through the chaos. But fear had already spread like wildfire. People were stampeding toward the exits, tripping over benches, desperate to escape. The SEAL froze when he heard it, a heavy chain rattling. He knew that sound. It was Randall. Randall had been handcuffed, but now the noise was closer, moving fast. Somehow, in the darkness, he had slipped free. Then came the sound of a fist slamming into flesh. Someone grunted in pain. A body hit the ground hard. Another scuffle. The SEAL clenched his jaw. Randall wasn't running. He was fighting. Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered on, casting the courtroom in a dim red glow. Shadows stretched across the walls, eerie and twisted. And there he was. Randall stood in the center of the chaos, blood running down his cheek from where the FBI agent had struck him earlier. But his cuffs were broken. He held a gun where he had gotten it. Nobody knew, and his wild eyes scanned the room like a predator hunting prey. The marshal nearest to him reached for his weapon, but Randall swung first. With terrifying speed, he cracked the butt of the pistol against the man's temple. The marshal crumpled to the floor. Randall lifted the gun, pointing it at the admiral. His lips curled into a snarl. You ruined everything. I'll end this right now." The entire courtroom held its breath. The admiral stood tall, unflinching, his stern gaze locked on Randall. But his hands were empty. He was defenseless. The SEAL moved before his brain had time to catch up. Years of training roared to the surface. He lunged forward, diving across the aisle. The gun fired. The explosion of sound was deafening. Sparks burst from the wood as the bullet tore into the bench, just inches from the admiral's chest. The SEAL slammed into Randall, both men crashing to the ground. The pistol clattered across the floor, skidding beneath the jury box. They wrestled fiercely, fists flying, grunts and growls echoing. Randall's strength was fueled by rage, his movements wild and brutal. But the SEAL fought with precision, every strike calculated, every hold controlled. The crowd roared in fear and shock, but the SEAL didn't hear them. The world narrowed to him and Randall snarled through gritted teeth. "You think this ends with me? You don't know how deep this goes." The SEAL's knee drove into Randall's ribs, forcing a pained gasp out of him. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it until bones cracked. Randall screamed, but he didn't give up. With his free hand, he clawed at the SEAL's face, his nails drawing blood. The SEAL winced, but didn't let go. He shoved Randall's head against the floor, pinning him down. By then, the FBI agents had rushed in, their weapons drawn. One scooped up the fallen gun, while the other clamped fresh cuffs on Randall's thrashing arms. This time, the agent hissed in his ear, "You're not slipping out." Randall spat blood on the floor, laughing manically even as they restrained him. "You fools. You really think it's just me? You'll see. You'll all see." The SEAL sat back, breathing hard, his chest heaving as he wiped the blood from his cheek. His eyes narrowed at Randall. Something about the man's words lingered in the air like poison. The judge, her voice trembling but firm, finally spoke. "Get him out of my courtroom. Now." The marshals dragged Randall to his feet, forcing him toward the doors. His laughter echoed behind him, chilling everyone who heard it. And then, boom! The glass windows at the back of the courtroom shattered. A smoke grenade rolled across the floor, hissing as a thick gray cloud swallowed the room. Coughs and screams filled the air again. The FBI agents shouted orders. The SEAL pulled his shirt over his nose, eyes stinging from the smoke. Through the haze, shadows moved fast, organized, and armed. They weren't cops. They weren't FBI. They were something else. And the SEAL's heart stopped when he realized what was happening. Randall wasn't just part of a network. He had allies, and they had just arrived. The courtroom was chaos. Smoke coiled across the floor, thick and choking. The alarms blared overhead, red lights flashing in time with the pounding hearts of everyone inside. People screamed and ducked under benches as armed shadows moved swiftly through the haze. The SEAL's instinct screamed at him. This wasn't random. These weren't civilians or even ordinary thugs. Their movements were sharp, disciplined. They weren't here to cause panic. They were here for Randall. "Eyes up. They're extracting him," the SEAL barked, his voice slicing through the noise like a whip. The FBI agents pivoted, but the first burst of automatic fire sprayed across the benches, splintering wood and sending chunks flying. People shrieked and dove to the ground. One marshal pulled the judge behind the stand just in time as bullets chewed through the wall above her head. The SEAL crouched low, crawling through the smoke. His eyes watered, but he tracked the shadows' movements. 3-0 for men. Masks. Tactical gear. Ex-military, no doubt about it. And in the center of it all, Randall grinned through his restraints. Even as the FBI agents tried dragging him out, one of the masked intruders tossed something across the floor. A flashbang. The explosion was deafening. A white light swallowed the room. The SEAL's world tilted. His ears rang, his vision spun. But he bit down hard, forcing himself to focus. Training took over. He blinked through the afterimage, dragging himself behind a shattered bench. The masked men were already closing in, one of them slamming an elbow into the nearest agent's jaw. Another swept Randall off his feet like he weighed nothing. "No," the SEAL growled, launching forward. He barreled into the first masked intruder, driving him to the ground. The man was strong, but sloppy. The SEAL twisted his arm until he felt the shoulder pop. The intruder screamed, dropping his weapon. The SEAL spun, grabbing the rifle before it hit the ground. Crack, crack, crack. 3 controlled bursts dropped 2 more shadows instantly. But Randall's last ally had already grabbed him, dragging him toward the blown-out window at the back of the courtroom. A rope dangled there, swaying in the smoke. Randall laughed through the chaos, spitting blood and rage. "You can't stop this, soldier. You can't stop us." The SEAL charged. He fired again, the bullet grazing the last man's arm, forcing him to stumble. Randall slipped, slamming into the window frame. The SEAL dove, tackling both men at once. They crashed to the floor, rolling dangerously close to the broken glass. Randall clawed for the rope. His ally threw a wild punch, but the SEAL ducked and drove the butt of the rifle into his ribs. The man crumpled, unconscious. Now it was just him and Randall, pinned against the shattered window. Randall's wild grin never faltered. His voice was a hiss, poisonous and steady. "You think beating me here changes anything? You think your Navy, your flag, your admiral will protect you when the truth comes out? This system was built to protect men like me, not you." The SEAL pressed the rifle's muzzle to Randall's chest. His finger twitched on the trigger. The room was silent, all eyes locked on him. The air hung heavy with smoke, fear, and fury. The admiral stepped forward, his voice calm but iron-hard. "Son, don't give him what he wants." The SEAL's chest heaved. He wanted nothing more than to pull the trigger, to end this racist monster right there in front of everyone. But he saw it now. Randall wanted to die a martyr, to leave behind chaos that would outlive him. The SEAL lowered the rifle. His voice was low, but it carried across the entire room. "No, you don't get to go out in glory. You're going to live, and you're going to face justice." He swung the butt of the rifle once more. Randall collapsed, unconscious, finally silent. The courtroom erupted, half in relief, half in stunned shock. The smoke began to clear, revealing bodies of Randall's allies sprawled across the floor. The FBI agents rushed in, securing the scene, cuffing whoever was left alive. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the judge stood, her robe torn, her voice steady despite the chaos. "This court is adjourned." The SEAL stood there, his chest still burning, his fist still clenched. He looked at Randall's limp body and knew this wasn't over. Randall wasn't lying. There were more like him, a whole system behind him. The Admiral placed a hand on his shoulder. His voice was grave. "You fought well. But this is just the beginning." And in that moment, the SEAL realized the battle wasn't just for survival. It was for justice, for truth, for something bigger than any courtroom could hold. The fight had only just begun.